Hi, I'm Jessica,
And I'm Tracy.
and this is She's on Top, the place where we celebrate and elevate women.
And today we're talking with Samantha Share from Share Lawyers. And we're doing a 4-part series with Share Lawyers on insurance. And today we're discussing part 4. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Sam.
Hello.
So today we're doing life insurance and critical illness. And let's start with life, because there's term and whole life insurance. Is that right?
Yes, generally speaking, those are the two types of life insurance that would be available for purchase. So life insurance is an insurance that you buy to pay out a certain amount of money to your beneficiaries when you die. So your beneficiaries are typically a spouse or your children or a different family member or friend even, and that money would go to them when you die, and it could be anywhere from $50,000 to $1 million, depending on what you decide to purchase. Generally speaking, life insurance would be divided into term and whole life. Term life insurance is typically you purchasing it for a term. So it could be for 10 years, it could be to age 65. And typically that insurance is less expensive because at the end of the term, the life insurance is finished. And if you have not died by the end of the term, which is more likely, then that's it. It's gone. So it might make sense to do that if you want to spend less money on a policy, or let's say for a certain term in your life you're going to have young children, and you would want them to be supported when you die because they're under the age of 18. So you purchase it from age 30 to 50, let's say. And after you turn 50, your kids are going to be older, so they don't need life insurance anymore. That's an example.
Okay.
But it probably makes more sense for most people to consider a whole life policy because you really don't know when you're going to die. And if you're investing money in premiums for this insurance, you don't want it to just vanish. So whole life would mean it covers you for your whole life whenever you die. And typically the premiums go up as you get older. But you can talk about more of those details with an insurance agent and different subcategories within those different types of policies.
That makes sense. So when is a good time to buy life insurance? So when's the best time to get it? What's the timing?
Well, it really depends. So most people don't think about it when they're young. But really, when you're young is the best time to buy it, when you're young and healthy. Because, typically with life insurance, they're going to scrutinize or ask for all of your medical history. And that's not to say that if you had a medical condition, they wouldn't cover you or you couldn't purchase life insurance. You certainly could. But sometimes if you've had a serious medical condition that's ongoing, then the life insurance might exclude that medical condition if that medical condition caused you to die. So if you're young and healthy, it's easier to get the policy. It's going to be less expensive, and it would make more sense to purchase it. It also makes more sense to purchase it when you have children, because obviously children cannot support themselves, particularly for, let's say, the first 18 to 25 years of their life, or longer. And, that would make more sense because if you're the primary caregiver and the breadwinner in your family, then, if you are no longer there, then that money would go to support your children and your family. So those are kind of important things to raise in terms of purchasing life insurance and the timing. Absolutely.
Now, why are claims denied?
So I would say life insurance claims are much less frequently denied than our previous videos talking about disability. But generally speaking, there's two issues with life insurance. First of all is what we call the contestability period. So the first 2 years after which you purchased insurance is the contestability period. So it's more likely that your claim would be denied if you died within the first 2 years after having purchased the insurance. And mainly those would be denied for reasons of misrepresentation, so that you didn't tell the insurance company or all of the information or answer all the questions truthfully on the application. So this goes back to some of our previous conversations about telling the insurance company everything, particularly about your medical history. So even if it says on the form, oh, you know, have you seen a doctor in the last 5 years for a medical condition? You should not say no. Pretty much at all.
Don't say no.
You don't have a condition. I'm assuming that you do see your family doctor, even for an annual physical. So, you know, you really don't want to say no unless it's absolutely no. And certainly you don't want to withhold any information. For the first 2 years, the threshold for denying the claim on misrepresentation is lower. So they just have to prove that you misrepresented in that you did not tell the truth. Beyond the 2 years, the test for misrepresentation is that you fraudulently misrepresented, which means that you basically had to do it in a fraudulent manner or, you know, intentionally. So, you know, that is a harder threshold for the insurance company to meet. Another point I would say when you're making your application with respect to misrepresentation is do not rely on your agent to tell you and explain to you everything that's in that application, or have the agent fill it out for you without you reading the application and making sure you're fully in agreement with all of the answers to the questions. We've had cases where that was an issue, and then the agent had to get involved with the lawsuit as well. And one example of where that would come up is, let's say there was a language barrier. So the person that was applying for insurance, English was not their first language, so they were relying on the agent to explain to them the application. But then, you know, the agent may not have completed the application as fulsomely as they should have. So it would be better in that case, if your English was not your first language, to actually get an interpreter or a third party to help to explain the application and make sure that you had filled it out appropriately.
So sorry, Sam, but would you maybe take it to your lawyer when you get it, or would you're saying to see somebody else? So who else would you take it to?
But, you know, if let's say you took it to me, I don't speak, you know, Cantonese or, you know, most languages. So it would actually make more sense to either take it to a lawyer who speaks that language or a foreign language interpreter who could then explain the application to the person in their native language, so they can say, okay, yes, I feel comfortable that I've filled this out properly and given all the information. So, you know, I've had several cases where language was a major issue in terms of the application process. So.
Another thing we wanted to bring up, which is a bit of a tricky subject, is suicide when it comes to life insurance, only because I think there is, and you can tell us if this is mythology, but there is a general concern or a myth that, you know, a lot of times life insurance isn't honored if the person commits suicide because, you know, they take their own life. Is there truth in that? Is that something that you have to look at specifically when you're getting a life insurance policy? I mean, it's a horrific thing to think about, but, you know.
I mean, every policy is different, and you have to look at the particular product that you're purchasing. If that's a concern for you, for example, if you have mental health, depression, and I mean, not to say that you know you're going to commit suicide, but certainly something to look at. I'd say most policies, if it's within the first 2 years, that contestability period again, then they would be more likely to deny for a suicide because you know, they're going to say, well, it's something that we might have known about or that you should have told us about, and we may not have given you this policy or issued the policy had you told us that you had depression, for example. And that's the reason for the denial. Beyond the 2 years, most policies would not exclude suicide unless it was explicitly excluded as a medical condition. You know, we're not going to cover anything related to mental illness or suicide because that's something that you had already suffered from when you made the application.
Or whoever it suffered from, right? Okay,
Right.
yeah.
And what about situations like COVID right now? Would that be something that would be excluded? It's a pandemic, it wasn't foreseen. Like, would that be excluded under life insurance?
No, I mean, any reason that's outside of your control, like let's say you had a car accident, you died in a car accident, you died because of COVID, you died, for other, acts of God. I say that in quotations because that's how most insurance companies phrase it.
Okay.
That's not an exclusion under an insurance policy. They will typically cover you for whatever reason that causes your death, unless it's specifically an exclusion.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Perfect. So then the other thing we were going to talk about today was critical illness. And this one is really important and really personal because as far as I know, the critical illness covers things like cancer, breast cancer, that kind of thing, right? If you have a critical illness policy, which is, huge for women, a lot of our audience, women in their 40s and 50s. I think most of us know somebody, whether it's male or female, has dealt with cancer. Is critical illness for that?
Yes. So critical illness is, it's what it sounds like. It typically covers you for a critical illness, something that is bad, I would say is a good definition. If you get a critical illness, one of the illnesses listed specifically in the policy, at any time when the policy is in force, and it will pay you a lump sum amount, whatever amount you might purchase. And that's it. It doesn't pay you a monthly amount. It will just pay you that lump sum. But it has to be one of the illnesses defined in the policy. So the reason that we see policies typically or claims denied under critical illness is usually because the condition that the person is suffering from is not listed in the policy. And it doesn't matter if you are unable to work. It doesn't matter if you continue to be able to work. As long as you have been diagnosed by a doctor and typically have testing to support that you've been diagnosed with that condition, then the insurance should pay. The trouble is that sometimes they deny on sort of particularities. So, cancer is more clear cut, I would say. Unless you're, if you're still under investigation for cancer, then you probably wouldn't be able to make a claim until you had a definite diagnosis. But, often these policies also cover for things like heart attack, stroke, other illnesses like that. So we've seen claims where somebody, maybe they didn't have a heart attack, but they required heart surgery because they had a blockage or something, and that would not be covered because they did not suffer a heart attack. They had a heart condition, they needed heart surgery. So that's something to look at closely in terms of what the policy covers specifically. It's hard to know in the future what condition you might get and to protect against that. But I would say the longer the list and the more broad it is, the better. Obviously, insurance companies are going to want to protect themselves in terms of limiting claims, but you should look at different policies and compare that list of illnesses. And for example, if you have an illness that runs in your family that you might have a predisposition for, you might want to make sure that that's on the list. That would make sense to me.
So
can I ask one quick question, Trace, before I know?
Sure.
Sorry, I just quickly before we get off cancer, breast cancer, would it be covered under anything else? Because then the reason I'm asking, I had one friend who got breast cancer and got a $400,000 payout, and I've had other friends, women go through it and nothing. So is specifically because it is such a common disease, is critical illness what you need for that, or would it be covered under life or something?
Well, it's not going to be covered
not under life, I beg your pardon.
You don't. But it would also be covered under disability if you can't work because of your is particularly when you're undergoing treatment. So like I know commonly for breast cancer, you might require some chemotherapy, radiation, you know, you might require surgery. So if you're unable to work for some period of time because of the breast cancer, then that would be covered under disability. And we also see claims for disability, not to get off track, but just to talk about the cancer, you know, people get paid for disability maybe for that, you know, 1 to 2 year period where they're undergoing treatment, and then they might be cancer free, but they still can't go back to work because they're suffering from things like chemo fog, and the insurance company cuts them off. But we would argue that they still can't work because they have brain fog, cognitive deficits as a result of the chemotherapy, and they would have an ongoing claim for disability benefits.
So then my question kind of goes back to the same thing. It's about mental illness again. It seems to me it can be covered under disability, but could it ever be covered under critical illness? Like, let's say you know you have a history of depression in your family. Could you make it a list under critical illness, or not really? Is it really disability?
I would say primarily it's disability, because, you know, many people suffer from mental illness and are still able to work and lead a full life. And maybe they have periods of time where they're they're having stress in their life and they need to take time off work. I have not seen many policies of critical illness policies that cover mental health conditions. Perhaps, you know, something really life-changing, not to say that mental illness generally isn't life-changing, but, you know, like schizophrenia or, you know, something that's really gonna impact and, you know, is chronic in nature. So that's something you could look at, as I mentioned before, particularly if those types of conditions maybe run in your family. It's something you could get in the future, or be diagnosed with in the future. But generally speaking, I'd say it's more of a disability issue, mental illness.
And I had one last question, because I thought it was interesting that you said, you know, if you had a history of, you know, mental illness, or if you had a history of a certain disease, you may want to get that covered. Wouldn't that be a reason for them to maybe not cover you though? Like, I know, you know, it's like, you know, that people are afraid to disclose things because it's like, oh, well, your family has all this. So how does that work? Is it just a higher premium, or, you know?
I mean, it really would depend. I mean, that's something you need to talk more with the agent about, but certainly you don't want to not disclose anything. So if the application says, does your family have a history of any of these illnesses, then you don't want to not tell them, because the problem is as we were discussing before, if you don't disclose it, then they can just say, well, you didn't tell us about this, and we would not have issued this policy if you had told us, or, you know, we're not covering you. So it's better to say, okay, well, you know, I might have a history, maybe I have a predisposition, and that might affect the premiums on the policy. Perhaps it might become an exclusion under the policy, you know, that you wouldn't be covered for XYZ condition, because you are, it's more about you, I would say, than your family history. Because they can't say, oh, well, every single person in your family has all these conditions, so you're definitely going to get it and it's an exclusion. I haven't seen that often. It's more about you and your own medical history.
Well, thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Dan. This has all been so helpful. And for anyone who's watching now, we have 3 other videos. We talk about disability. And to me, like, you know, why you're denied, what kind of medical information you have to give is so important. So thank you so much for sharing this information with us. And it was wonderful. Hopefully we'll get to talk to you some more at another date.
Thanks, Sam.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.